About a year ago, Juan Brown and I did a BS Works episode with Kevin Price about the U.S. Air Force's auto ground collision avoidance system. It's a fascinating system that has saved 13 lives, 13 airplanes for the Air Force, and finally I got to go to AFRL and fly the sim, so check it out. Hi, I'm Scott Perdue, and today on FlyWire I'm going to talk about we're going to go fly the Auto GCAS simulator at AFRL. I met Kevin Price in Dayton to fly the sim and see for myself what this GCAS thing actually does. I'm very interested in the system, but more than that, I really wanted to ask the question, see whether this technology might work in GA. I mean, it's fantastic that it's working in the fighter world and the active duty or reserve, all that stuff, but what about GA? Because we need help. This GCAS system has been fielded in F-16s and is currently being incorporated in the F-35. Full disclosure, this sim is generic, and also my cameraman for the event was one of the Air Force PA folks who agreed to wield the camera, so we didn't show anything that shouldn't be shown. The simulator, as I said, is generic. The HUD display is the same thing. It's not something secret here. There's no secret that was filmed. It's all just representative of what current fighter technology is. It was a lot of fun to fly and very interesting, so let's check it out.
All right, Scott, here we are today. You're taking a look at the Auto GCAS sim we've talked about previously. I'm really glad to have you visit us here at AFRL, Wright-Patterson. So I'll just start off with the basics on how the system works. And so basically what you're seeing here is the terrain around Edwards Air Force Base. It's a scene wrapped around digital terrain elevation data. Every lat long on the planet has an elevation associated with it. This was derived from data from the Space Shuttle mission back in 2000, the SRTM mission. And so basically what we have here is essentially Edwards. If you were flying out there for real, this is what you would see. What we're approaching now is what was called GCAS Mountain, where a lot of runs were done just northeast of Edwards to make sure that the system was going to be non-nuisancy and effective in avoiding terrain. So what you're seeing here is you're going to see some chevrons coming in from the side. That's when the system says, hey, you're going to hit this mountain, or you may. As a pilot, fighter pilot retired, I would be uncomfortable right here. I would be recovering. You might go a little closer, but then the system's going to say, and then it's going to up. And without you doing anything, it's now kept you from hitting the ground, and we cleared the top of that ridge by 300 feet. So we can do that again. So back here you go. So now you can fly it, and just you'd probably go lower if you're being your good old fighter pilot self back in the day. So here we're 900 feet above the ground. Just let you get the radar altimeter, so we're about 500 feet. Now 300 feet, it's not going off, it's not creating a nuisance, as we're, the system is not even thinking about activating yet. Again, as a fighter pilot, right now I'd think about clearing this ridge. The system is well inside of that.
Well inside of it.
And there you go.
So it actually got to about 5.5 on that.
On the G's?
Yeah.
Yeah, the system's designed for 5, and it will, sometimes it will overshoot up to 5.5. And that actually aligns nicely with our stores limitation if you think back to your Mark 84 days and such like that. But that's not why it was done. It was done for 5Gs because they found that if a pilot G-locked, that you can actually wake back up under 5Gs. So if you're over 5Gs, you'll stay out. And so the idea was at 5Gs, your body can still recover itself, so you can wake up in the midst of a G-lock event. So, but coincidentally and very conveniently, it aligned with our stores limitations for most of the external general purpose weapons, right? So here you go.
So you don't damage the airplane.
Exactly. So it's just convenient that it works out that way. So now we can do some more aggressive maneuvering. So we go back to, this is north of Edwards, Sidewinder Canyon. It's often referred to as Star Wars Canyon because of Star Wars 1977, Luke Skywalker, Death Star. And a lot of runs were made here to make sure the system was effective and non-nuisancy. Those are the things you really got to worry about. It can't be going off all the time, otherwise the pilots turn it off. So the system really got wrung out here extensively. And again, if you were to fly this in a real airplane, this is what you would be seeing. You'd see obviously higher fidelity of the bushes and things like that, but as far as the terrain itself, this is what it looks like. You're flying 540 knots, that's not unreasonable for what we would be flying, in the F-16 or F-15E or that you know well, and or F-35. It's a little bit faster than we maybe would normally fly, but still you see it's working quite well. And it's not even thinking about activating. When you see the chevrons goes in, that's when it's thinking about it. It's usually about 2 seconds or so prior to activation, but that's changing very dynamically as a function of how you're maneuvering. There you got the fly up. Notice it's always it rolls your wings level and pulls 5 Gs. So if you go back down into the canyon here, and once we get close to the terrain, if I go like up against the edge of the mountain over there to the side. All right, so now if you roll to pull into the mountain, just roll and pull, it's going to roll you wings level, and then it always does that. It doesn't roll you away from the mountain. It always rolls wings level and pulls 5 Gs.
Okay. And when it engages, it locks you out. You no longer can roll or stop the roll, stop the pitch.
Unless you know it's an anomaly, it's not working properly, then you've got that paddle switch on the stick that you can say, look, this is wrong, and you as a pilot then can intervene and stop it. So that'd be pretty sporty, right? Flying it for real, and
yeah.
It's not activating. It's considering your wingspan, the uncertainties associated with GPS navigation, inertial-based navigation as well, the data that was derived from satellite, and it knows what essentially buffers that with different varying levels based upon the mode that you have selected.
Okay, so this is, let's just demo a diving delivery. About a 20-degree roll out.
There you go.
It's another fighter kind of.
So it's going to be thinking about this ridge over here, even though you're aiming at that. It's modeling all of that. So this is actually a really good example. It's going to think about that while you're going for that. You'll see here. I would be really squirming right here if I
wouldn't like this at all.
Like really squirming. You'll notice this really shows well. You got 2 activations there. It cleared you from the initial ridge, and it's thinking about the next ridge.
Yeah.
That's really a very, very outstanding example of how the system works and to be non-nuisancey.
That's pretty cool. So let's talk about the applicability to GA airplanes.
All right, so as far as showing how this could apply to general aviation, let's go back to Edwards. We can move ourselves rapidly here. And so when you start thinking about making a system automatic, it's challenging. For the F-16, it took 25 years to get that, several things. We had to have the technology with GPS and INS to make it happen. We had to have a world model that was accurate for both elevation and latitude and longitude. But then we also had to model the aircraft performance. And then additionally, we had to make sure that the pilots didn't find it to be a nuisance. So all those things added up to taking 25 years to get the F-16.
Yeah.
So if we were to put a automatic system into commercial aviation, let's say general aviation, you could do that. However, it's going to be a little challenging because we have different levels of performance. You fly the Bonanza a lot. I have no time to Bonanza, but it's certainly a higher performing aircraft than a Cessna 152. So there's going to be different speeds, different levels of performance that you would expect out of it, different G-loading capabilities. Your Bonanza is acro qualified, whereas other aircraft are not. So you'd have to model all of that per each aircraft, and then you'd have to factor in how do we make this non-nuisancy. There's going to be varying levels of tolerance for what's nuisance. So a lot of research would have to go into how do we make this automatic in general aviation aircraft. So I don't think that that's probably necessarily the first iteration of what should be done on general aviation. I think it should be more with a pilot activated recovery system when they know they're in trouble with respect, let's say, to spatial disorientation in the weather, which kills 200 or 300 people a year, where people fly inadvertently into the weather and then they are not just not able to keep the wings level, they find themselves upside down at 50 degrees nose low. That's where they can most need the help. And so in addition to our auto system, we have what's called a pilot activated recovery system, or PARS. So when the pilot knows that they're in trouble, they can push the button, and you can take care of the ground collision that could be well imminent before the auto system even ever needs to kick in. You don't want to have to rely on an auto system, you know, a few hundred feet above the ground if you can fix it early at 20,000 feet or 5,000 feet above the ground. So let's move ourselves back to Edwards here again. All right, so let's go, like, I don't know, left bank 30 degrees, and then get the nose about 20 degrees nose low. And let's say you know as a pilot that you're having issues here and you're fighting it. So we have this button here, you push it, and then it's going to fix it for you. So go ahead and push the PARS button. It says active here. It's just
okay,
right here. And then it will say recovery. There. It fixed it for you.
Okay, so I've got a Garmin GFC 500 autopilot in my Bonanza, and it's got a level button.
Right.
But it only operates within really a relatively limited range of bank angle and speed and pitch.
Right.
And notably, there was a recent accident in the retail where it got really fast, and then the pilot probably activated too much G, too much G available, the airplane came apart. So can it be retrofitted so this would operate outside of that envelope? In other words, expand the activation envelope?
So last year at Oshkosh, AFRL, we were there, and I made it a point to go around and talk to like Honeywell, Garmin, other folks, either manufacturer, the servos that activate autopilots, or the software that controls it through the FMS or avionics systems. And what you find, this is from my own experience as well flying, even though fighter pilot retired, I instruct civilian now. What you find with most general aviation, and I would even venture to say most, even commercial, even airline type autopilots and FMS systems, is that they're limited where they can be engaged in terms of bank angle. A lot of times that's just software driven. And then the servos themselves typically are limited to about 1.2 or 1.3 Gs. And that aligns roughly with about 40 degrees of bank, right? So it's about where the bank angle is, it's about that's where the thing quits working. So what needs to happen on the general aviation front is that software limits for autopilot engagement would need to be removed so that you can engage it at 180 degrees of bank, upside down. And then the servos themselves need to be able to command at least 2 Gs. And 2 Gs would not over G any aircraft that's out there, but if you're only pulling 1 G and you're in a 40-degree dive, you're not going to recover. You need at least 2 Gs. So basically you need to do that. Software change to the avionics so it can command the autopilot system, that it can command, you can activate the wings level function beyond whatever bank limit they happen to have, and also then the system ultimately can pull up to 2 Gs. So that's the conversation we've started with the folks that work for general aviation or experimental aviation aircraft. Obviously, this ties in as well with commercial. And there haven't been that many because you've got a crewed scenario there, so it's not that often that you have both pilots that are spatially disoriented, but it potentially can happen. But it is extensible across all those different categories of aircraft, and it's just again, they've already kind of done it. They've made a great start.
Yeah, they got the blue level button, but that only operates inside of its inside of its engine.
And I venture to say that when most people need that, it's beyond those limits. Right. And so you're 100 degrees of bank, 120 degrees of bank. You're somewhat inverted. You're 20 degrees nose low. The average pilot's going to have a really hard time recovering from that. If they've had upset training that can help them, if they're instrument qualified where they can actually interpret the ADI, but statistics tell the story. We lose people every year. Every year,
yeah.
People inadvertently flight into IMC. And so that, I think, is the initial and best first effort, would be to continue to work. I have attended, as an outcome from Oshkosh last year, talking to the FAA, they invited me to the General Aviation Joint Safety Committee meeting, which is a consortium with the FAA leads, but it involves all the primary manufacturers of avionics and flight control software and autopilots, such as Garmin, Honeywell, all those folks attend. So I made a presentation there last September and pretty much said what I just told you, that here's what we could do. When I say we, the United States of America, smart people,
Right.
Which they could leverage, you know, at least what we're really good about here is developing requirements. Okay, so we have engineers, brilliant engineers, we have you know, expertise throughout the lab, PhDs, and you have people like me and that either used to fly or are currently flying that can help really refine requirements. So that's where you start, is with what are the requirements. And then as far as our software here probably is not particularly directly applicable to a manual recovery system, but the requirements well could be. And the concept which we're demonstrating here is hopefully motivational for people to say, hey, we could benefit from this in the civilian world. So that's kind of, I think, where we should go, you know, at least initially in the civilian world.
Yeah, initially, you just demonstrated to me a little while ago the formation, you know, air-to-air, mid-air kind of protection.
Right.
So I would see mid-air protection for GA airplanes, airliners, would be fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
It's better than GCAS.
Yeah. Yeah, our air collision avoidance system, what is different about it, one, we have a loss. If you take it in fighter aircraft world, these are all open source numbers, which I can share with you later. We lose about, in the F-16 single seat fighter world, we lose about half of our aircraft operationally to run into the ground. But since we filled auto GCAS, that stopped. From 2013, we lost 13 pilots. From 2014 until today, we have lost none for which auto GCAS was present, and we've saved 13 pilots. So it's demonstrable that we've been effective with that. So essentially, if you imagine the pie, we've eliminated half of the loss numbers just by taking care of what we call CFIT, controlled flight into terrain. What's left is 25% roughly are mid-airs. The other 25% are weird things like pilots running out of gas and crazy stuff like that. But as far as accidents, 25% is the mid-air. And so that's where we're focused now. We're doing a program with the F-35, which we'll test later this year. It's a collaborative program with the UK where we're going to demonstrate the ability to prevent mid-air collisions in the F-35. We previously did that on the F-16. It was 2016, 2017, in which we demonstrated that you could use this system effectively to avoid mid-airs, even in the most intense, close-in, quote-unquote, dogfighting maneuvering. Now, and what's a bit challenging about that with going, again, it starts with requirements. How would you apply this to a civil aviation world where they aren't thinking about a 500-foot training bubble,
Right.
where they aren't trying to pull anywhere from, you know, 1 to 9 Gs in close-in maneuvering, going upside down. So, and you aren't going to have that G authority. So a couple things would have to be thought about there. One is that you'd have to have a means of talking to the other aircraft. ADS-B is really good for that. The issue with ADS-B, though, it only updates once or twice a second. Our system updates 20 times a second with a lot more data than what ADS-B includes. So to have an automatic system in civilian aircraft will be a challenge because we need a higher rate and we're limited in our G performance. However, it doesn't mean we shouldn't look at that. And so, again, we are good at refining requirements. We can work with industry to help refine requirements. TCAS, as I understand it right now, I think it only maneuvers in the vertical. So it either tells some aircraft to descend or to climb, whereas ours can, you know, maneuver to the side. Now, we do have a program, Detect and Avoid, that we've worked with throughout a long time here at the lab that is intended to for unmanned aircraft to be able to operate in the national airspace system. And so it doesn't wait till the last instant. You know, our nominal miss distance for fighter close-in air collision avoidance is 180 feet. You know, and that's after pulling up to as much as 7, 8, 9 Gs, 7 Gs, I guess. We don't want to do that in civilian aircraft. You know,
Right.
So better yet, you do it at a distance. So, and that's what this Detect and Avoid program, which I work peripherally. It's not really a very active program we have right now, but as we as a country work to extend unmanned aerial operations throughout the country, we need to make sure we are working with the FAA, the national authorities, so we can allow these things to operate within our airspace and not put at risk either the people flying or these vehicles themselves, you know, from running into each other. So that was maybe more than you want to hear, but
No, not at all.
The-
I think that the less performance, I mean, we're not talking the ability to do 5Gs in GA airplanes, but they can easily do 2.5.
yes, yeah,
And I think that what that does is that just creates, as you mentioned, a longer distance. So instead of waiting until the last minute,
Yeah.
on a 180-foot miss, we're going to basically shoot for a longer miss.
exactly.
Larger.
So one of the challenges we have, even applying the fighter, you know, like for fighters to avoid civil aviation aircraft, we don't get the data rate from them. We can pull 9Gs to avoid them, but we don't get the data rates needed to be able to be where we are confident that's where the aircraft is at. So the ADS-B, it's about once every 2 seconds, there's a huge uncertainty volume, what that aircraft can do in 1 or 2 seconds. And so therefore we have to buffer that. So really what we would do, we only will provide alerts to the pilot, and they'll have to manually fly that. Not to say there's maybe some creative way you could do that in general aviation to where you would automatically maneuver the aircraft. But again, if we stack up our loss numbers, where we most need to focus first is helping to avoid healthy airplanes from hitting the ground. And again, weather, disorientation, a variety of things. And so I think that's where your initial effort goes. Would recommend manual for that first. You can think about auto later. But then we could, at the same time, we can walk and chew gum, right? So we can think about how we can maybe better improve our air collision avoidance capabilities as well, you know, throughout.
Can we take a real quick look at that and just see how it works?
Yep, so go ahead. Okay, so right now you're your head on, actually, with an aircraft. This is going to happen really fast. It started out at 3 miles, and boom, right there, you missed it.
And they deconflicted.
Yeah, so they're talking to each other, and they are actually cooperatively deconflicting. So this is not unlike the way, you know, we train. And so what you see here is in, you know, 3 miles we start this, happens really quickly. We're doing what, a mile every 4 to 6 seconds that we're going to pass in 12 seconds or less. And 800 some knots of closure. And then you'll see here, in this case, it didn't activate. We passed each other within 100 feet, and it didn't activate. And the reason it didn't activate because it says you aren't going to hit each other. And that would be a training rule violation.
Yeah.
You go talk to the squadron commander over this, you might get grounded for a month or whatever, you know, especially if you did it again, right? Let's go ahead and do it again, because we're in the sim and we're retired, so we can do this kind of stuff, right? So, so let's see what happens. So the aircraft's inside that square that's coming at you. So here it did activate, and if you're watching really closely, this is the distance numbers, and it got within 100 feet. So let's do it again, and then this time just very slightly offset the circle outside the. So just maybe slightly, just push it to the side a little. Okay, right there's good. So let's see how close we get. In this case, we get down to 200 feet. Again, train rule violation. 500 feet standard. That was a train rule violation, but it didn't even think about activating.
Right.
So that's the non-nuisance characteristics of the. In fact, it was the demand signal. If we had a system that was nuisancey, the pilots would not have it. But because they've seen, we have, like I was saying, street credibility. It has saved 13 pilots, you know, in the last 10 years. So now they listen to us when we talk about air collision, how we can avoid that. And because yeah, it happens, you know. You and I were talking earlier, you had 2 really close calls in the fighter world. I had, likewise with students, had 2 extremely close calls. I would like to have had this system.
Yeah, it would have.
We're both here,
Yeah.
but we probably know people that aren't, that had these kind of
Yeah.
accidents, you know, so.
Well, I owe my life to somebody else.
Yeah.
He made the right call. And
Let's look at this, go back to Edwards here just for a second again. I want to, on that PARS thing, and probably have a recovery system, what I want to do here is kind of show where, you know, how a person could get really in trouble here. And your average general aviation VFR pilot, how are they going to fix this? So go ahead and push your button there.
okay.
There, we fixed it. I venture to say 9 out of 10 general aviation VFR only pilots in the weather at night would not have fixed that. You know, so you pulled 5 Gs, which we aren't going to do that in general aviation aircraft, but if we do 2 Gs, it's sufficient to roll upright and recover. You could even go to 3, right? Because with the normal category, you got 3.8 Gs. With utility, you got 4.4. So we could even target 3 Gs, you know. But
Well, that's when I teach UPRT for nose low, unusual attitude like that was, is I teach to push so you unload and then roll so you set your wings.
Yep.
And it doesn't necessarily have to be wings level with the earth.
Yep.
As long as your lift vector is less than about 20 degrees,
Yep.
you can pull.
Yep.
And you're going to get above the horizon. And then I try to teach them to pull the 3Gs, and most of them will do too.
Yeah. They don't. It's not a familiar feeling, right?
Yeah,
So,
it's like, oh, this is really heavy,
Yeah.
and I don't want to do any more.
We're drinking our coffee under 3Gs, right? So,
Although I'm a 4G guy now.
yeah, yeah. I keep it that way on the decathlon. It's 6, but we do 3.5. You know, I can do everything 3.5 Gs on an airplane. So.
Well, thanks for showing this. I'm hoping that this initiative continues with general aviation, and we can impact that, because you know, the loss of control is a huge issue. It's the number 3 killer in the top 3 every year. Control flight into terrain is a big issue, and this kind of technology with an advanced autopilot like the GFC series of Garmin, other people are doing as well, then it could save a lot of lives.
Well, we appreciate your, I guess, visibility in the general aviation world, because we do want this technology to transition beyond the military. You know, this is life-saving technology, and it's in everyone's best interest that this technology propagates. And sometimes just getting the message out there is the real challenge. It's like, it's here, it's been developed over 25 years, it's fielded on the F-16, it's fielded on the F-35. We have looked at it on C-130J aircraft, and it's just we didn't have enough funding to continue to pursue that. But I flew the simulator down at Lockheed Martin, Marietta, and it worked fine. And the pilot said, we need this now in the C-130J, and there's just not sufficient funding even in the Air Force to make it happen. But the point being, this technology is extensible across a variety of platforms. You can walk before you run, and so yeah, if you can help as we interface with various industry players out there in the avionics world, the servo world, the overall autopilot market.
In the interest of time, I edited out a few things, one of which was the discussion about how this technology might impact runway incursions. It's just it was going on a bit long, so cut it out. But we need to walk before we run, and to me that looks like this might save a lot of civilian lives. There is a path forward to incorporating this in the civilian world. I'm hoping the industry and the FAA takes note. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time on FlyWire.